"You picked the wrong town," the officer said, certain he already knew exactly who she was. The red and blue lights painted the wet pavement in flashing streaks of color as traffic slowed along Route 17, just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Engines hummed. Wind pushed scattered leaves across the shoulder. Dozens of headlights drifted past in the darkness, but every eye seemed fixed on the woman standing beside the black Superbike. Naomi Carter slowly removed her helmet. Rainwater glistened on the carbon fiber shell as she lowered it to her side. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at the three officers surrounding her. The youngest of them, Officer Ethan Walker, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who believed he had already solved the situation. To him, the scene looked simple. A powerful motorcycle. A late-night stop. A rider who, in his mind, didn't belong on a machine worth more than many people's annual salary. The Ducati's engine clicked softly as it cooled. Naomi stood calmly beside it, her dark riding jacket reflecting the rotating patrol lights. Around them, the night air smelled of rain and hot asphalt. "License and registration," Walker said. Naomi reached carefully toward her pocket. "They're inside the saddle compartment," she answered. Her voice was steady, controlled, the kind of voice that never seemed rushed. Walker exchanged a glance with another officer before retrieving the documents himself. The moment he opened the compartment, he frowned. Everything inside was perfectly organized. Registration papers, insurance information, maintenance records. Nothing looked suspicious. Yet something about Naomi's calmness irritated him. Most people became nervous during a stop like this. Most people tried to explain themselves. Most people filled the silence. Naomi simply waited. Walker studied her driver's license. Naomi Carter, 35 years old. Baltimore, Maryland. He looked up again. Rain tapped against his patrol vehicle. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the clouds. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "A long ride," Naomi replied. "That's not an answer. It's the truth." A few passing drivers slowed enough to glance toward the scene before disappearing into the darkness. Walker folded his arms. He noticed the motorcycle again. The custom paint. The expensive components. The flawless condition. His assumptions began forming faster than facts. Naomi noticed it immediately. She had seen that look before. Seen it in airports. Seen it in hotels. Seen it in parking lots and restaurants. A look that decided who someone was before a single word was spoken. But her expression never changed. "Step away from the motorcycle," Walker instructed. Naomi obeyed without hesitation. The wind picked up. Her jacket shifted slightly as she moved. A line of patrol lights reflected in the visor still hanging from her hand. Another officer quietly examined the bike, while Walker continued questioning her. Minutes passed. The tension grew. Yet Naomi remained almost unusually composed. No frustration. No anger. No fear. Just patience. That calmness bothered Walker more than anything else. He wanted certainty. He wanted confirmation that his instincts were right. Instead, every answer she gave seemed measured and precise. The radio on his shoulder crackled. Static filled the air before fading away. Walker glanced toward his supervisor's vehicle parked farther down the shoulder. Then he turned back to Naomi. "You expect me to believe you're just out for a ride?" he asked. Naomi looked toward the dark highway stretching into the distance. Headlights streamed past, like rivers of white light. "Believe whatever you want," she said quietly. "The truth doesn't change." For the first time, Walker's jaw tightened. The rain intensified. Tiny droplets bounced from the motorcycle's fuel tank. Somewhere nearby, a cell phone camera appeared. Then another. Drivers were beginning to stop. Watch. Record. Observe. The atmosphere shifted. The roadside no longer felt like a routine traffic stop. It felt like the beginning of something neither side fully understood yet. Naomi could feel it. Walker could feel it too. But only one of them knew what was coming next. And as another flash of lightning illuminated the horizon, Naomi glanced briefly toward the patrol cars lined behind her. Her expression remained unreadable, almost as if she had seen this moment long before it arrived. The rain continued to fall as Naomi stood beneath the flashing lights, but her mind was nowhere near Route 17. Moments like this always pulled her backward through time. Long before the motorcycle, long before the federal credentials, long before anyone called her Special Agent Carter, she had been a quiet girl growing up on the east side of Baltimore. Her father drove a city bus for nearly 20 years. Every morning before sunrise, he would leave the apartment carrying a metal lunchbox and return long after dark smelling faintly of diesel fuel and coffee. Her mother worked the front desk at a medical clinic. Neither of them had power. Neither of them had influence. What they had was discipline. Naomi learned that early. She learned it while sitting at a small kitchen table doing homework under a flickering light fixture. She learned it while watching her father remain polite to people who treated him like he was invisible. She learned it while hearing her mother repeat the same sentence over and over. Character is who you are when nobody is watching. Most children forgot lessons like that. Naomi never did. By the age of 12, she could already see patterns other people missed. She noticed details, faces, conversations, tiny inconsistencies. Teachers called her observant. Her father called her relentless. When other kids spent weekends at the mall, Naomi spent hours reading books from the public library. Criminal investigations fascinated her. Human behavior fascinated her even more. She wanted to understand why people made choices, why some chose integrity and others chose shortcuts. Years later, that curiosity carried her through college and eventually into federal service. The path had never been easy. There were interviews where people underestimated her, meetings where her ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them, moments when she entered a room and immediately felt assumptions forming before introductions were even complete. Yet every challenge sharpened her. Every obstacle taught patience. Every setback strengthened discipline. Those lessons stayed with her now as she stood on the side of the highway watching Officer Walker study her paperwork for the third time. The wind pushed another wave of rain across the road. Naomi adjusted her grip on the helmet, but said nothing. Across from her, Walker appeared increasingly frustrated. The facts in front of him refused to match the picture he had already created in his mind. The motorcycle was legally registered. The insurance was valid. The license was clean. Everything checked out. Yet he continued searching for something that would justify his certainty. Naomi recognized the behavior immediately. She had spent years studying it. Sometimes people became attached to first impressions. Sometimes they became prisoners of them. A patrol car door opened farther down the shoulder. Another officer stepped outside carrying a tablet. Traffic continued moving slowly past the scene. Red taillights stretched across the wet highway like glowing ribbons disappearing into darkness. Naomi glanced toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those clouds, dawn was still hours away. She had planned to spend the night alone with the road, the engine, and the freedom that came from moving 70 miles per hour beneath an open sky. Instead, she found herself standing beneath flashing lights again. The irony was almost amusing. Her entire career revolved around facts, evidence, patience. Yet tonight, she was watching assumptions race ahead of truth in real time. Walker finally approached her again. Water dripped from the brim of his cap. His expression remained guarded. "You seem unusually calm," he said. Naomi looked at him for a moment. The rain softened slightly. The highway hummed in the distance. "Experience," she answered. Walker frowned. "Experience with traffic stops?" Naomi's eyes remained steady. "Experience with people deciding who I am before they know anything about me." For the first time, Walker did not respond immediately. The silence lingered between them. Brief. Uncomfortable. Then the radio on his shoulder suddenly crackled again, louder this time. A voice spoke through the static. Walker's expression changed almost instantly. Whatever message he had just received, it was important. And somewhere deep inside, Naomi already suspected the night was about to take a very different turn. Walker lifted a hand to his shoulder radio and stepped several feet away from the growing crowd near the roadside. Rain drummed softly against the patrol vehicles while passing headlights swept across the scene in slow waves of white and gold. Naomi watched without appearing to watch. Years of training had taught her how to read people from a distance. The slight tightening of Walker's jaw, the way his posture straightened, the brief glance he threw toward the other officers. Something had changed. Not dramatically. Not yet. But enough. The officer carrying the tablet approached him and quietly showed him something on the screen. Walker stared longer than expected. Then he looked back at Naomi. The confidence that had defined him earlier was still there, but now it shared space with uncertainty. That uncertainty interested Naomi more than anything else. Around them, the roadside spectators continued recording. A pickup truck remained parked nearly 100 feet away. Two college-aged men stood beside it whispering to each other while occasionally glancing toward the patrol cars. A woman inside a sedan held her phone against the window. Nobody seemed eager to leave. People sensed stories before they understood them. They recognized tension the same way sailors recognized changing weather. Walker returned a few moments later. Water rolled from the edge of his cap. His expression was controlled, but Naomi could see the questions forming behind his eyes. "You said you have experience with situations like this," he said. Naomi nodded slightly. "More than I would like. You speak like someone who works in law enforcement." Naomi offered a faint smile. "Do I?" Walker ignored the question. "What exactly do you do for a living?" Naomi looked toward the dark highway. The answer would have ended everything immediately. One sentence. 2 words. Yet she remained silent for several seconds. Not because she enjoyed the situation. Not because she wanted revenge. Because she believed something important was happening. People revealed themselves when they thought. They had power. Sometimes the truth arrived before introductions. "I work for the government," she finally said. Walker frowned. "That is pretty vague." "Most government jobs are." The officer with the tablet shifted uneasily nearby. Naomi noticed him looking repeatedly toward his screen. Another radio transmission crackled through the night. This time 2 officers exchanged glances before anyone responded. The atmosphere continued changing in subtle ways. Less certainty. More caution. Naomi had seen the pattern many times during investigations. Confidence moved quickly when supported by assumptions. It slowed down considerably when confronted by facts. The rain gradually weakened into a mist. Tiny droplets floated through the patrol lights like silver dust. Walker looked down at the registration paperwork once more, then at the motorcycle, then at Naomi. "That motorcycle costs more than some houses," he said. Naomi almost laughed. "Not in this market." One of the younger officers accidentally smiled before quickly hiding it. Walker did not. "You seem very comfortable under pressure." "Pressure is easier than prejudice," Naomi replied quietly. The words landed harder than she intended. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Even the younger officers looked away. Walker folded the paperwork and slipped it into a folder. His voice became more measured, more professional. "Is there anything else we should know?" Naomi met his gaze directly. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you are interested in the truth or in proving your first impression was correct." The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain clouds above them. Somewhere down the road, another vehicle approached. Its headlights appeared small at first, then brighter still. Naomi noticed the reaction before she saw the vehicle itself. The officer with the tablet suddenly straightened. Another officer took a slow breath. Walker turned toward the approaching lights. For the first time all night, nobody seemed certain what would happen next. The approaching vehicle was not a patrol car. It was a dark, gray government SUV moving steadily through the rain, its headlights cutting across the wet highway like twin beams through fog. Nobody spoke as it pulled onto the shoulder. The engine went quiet. The driver's door opened. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out holding a tablet beneath one arm. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and the calm posture of someone accustomed to entering tense situations without being intimidated by them. Naomi recognized him immediately. She kept her expression neutral. Walker did not. His eyes narrowed as he watched the stranger approach. The older man stopped several feet away and glanced briefly at Naomi before focusing on the officers. "Evening," he said. His voice was measured and professional. "Who is in charge here?" Walker stepped forward. "Officer Ethan Walker, Local Patrol Division." The man nodded once. "I am Robert Gaines." He reached into his coat and produced identification. Rain glistened across the plastic credentials. Walker studied them. His expression changed slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Naomi. Gaines belonged to a federal oversight office that coordinated with multiple agencies across the region. Not someone who normally appeared during routine traffic stops. The younger officers exchanged uncertain glances. Gaines accepted his credentials back and opened the tablet. The glow from the screen reflected across his face. "There appears to be some confusion regarding Ms. Carter's identity," he said calmly. Walker shifted his weight. "We are conducting a lawful investigation." "I understand." Gaines nodded. "And how is that investigation progressing?" Nobody answered immediately. The rain had nearly stopped now. Water dripped from nearby trees. Passing traffic seemed quieter. Even the spectators standing near the shoulder had fallen silent. Walker cleared his throat. "We are verifying information." Gaines looked toward Naomi. Has she been cooperative? Another pause followed. One of the younger officers finally spoke. Yes, sir. Gaines nodded again. Good. He tapped the screen several times. Then he turned the tablet toward Walker. Whatever appeared there held the officer's attention much longer than expected. His eyes moved across the display. Then, back to Naomi. Then to the screen again. The certainty that had carried him through the evening continued fading. Naomi watched without satisfaction. Without anger. Only observation. Walker lowered the tablet slowly. Why did she not identify herself? Gaines looked toward Naomi. That is a fair question. Naomi finally answered. Because nobody asked the right one. Walker stared at her. I asked what you did for a living. And I told you I worked for the government. Walker looked away for a moment. The response frustrated him because it was true. Every word of it. Gaines closed the tablet. Ms. Carter has every legal right to travel without announcing her profession to strangers. The younger officers suddenly seemed very interested in the pavement beneath their boots. Walker remained silent. Somewhere overhead, the clouds began breaking apart. Small gaps revealed fragments of moonlight. The highway looked different now. Less threatening. Less dramatic. Yet the tension remained. Not because of what had happened. Because of what had not happened yet. Naomi could sense it. Gaines could sense it too. The older man stepped closer to Walker. His voice remained respectful. Professional. Officer, I recommend we finish reviewing the facts before reaching any further conclusions. Walker nodded slowly. It was the first time all evening that he appeared willing to listen instead of react. Naomi looked toward her motorcycle standing beneath the fading patrol lights. Water still shimmered across the black paint. The road beyond stretched endlessly into darkness. She wanted nothing more than to continue riding. Yet something told her the night was still far from over. And judging by the expression that briefly crossed Gaines's face as he glanced down at his tablet one final time, he knew it too. For several seconds nobody moved. The roadside that had felt so crowded earlier now seemed strangely quiet. Even the spectators standing near the edge of the highway appeared uncertain about what they were witnessing. Walker looked from Gaines to Naomi and back again. Questions continued building faster than answers. The tablet remained tucked beneath Gaines's arm, but whatever information it contained had clearly changed the direction of the night. A cool breeze drifted across the shoulder as the clouds slowly separated overhead. Moonlight reflected across the wet pavement. Naomi remained beside her motorcycle, calm as ever. She had spent years sitting across from suspects, witnesses, attorneys, executives, and public officials. One lesson had always remained true. People revealed more about themselves when they felt uncomfortable than when they felt confident. Walker was beginning to understand that feeling now. He glanced toward one of the younger officers. Run another verification, he said. The officer nodded and returned to the patrol vehicle. A few moments later, the glow of a computer screen illuminated the interior through the windshield. Naomi watched the process unfold without interruption. She could have ended the uncertainty immediately. She could have displayed credentials, made phone calls, invoked authority. Instead, she allowed the facts to arrive on their own. Facts carried more weight when people discovered them themselves. Gaines stood quietly beside her. You could have told them hours ago, he said softly. Naomi smiled faintly. It has not been hours. Gaines returned the smile. It probably feels like it to them. The younger officer emerged from the patrol vehicle, carrying several printed pages. His expression looked noticeably different now. Less confident. More cautious. He handed the documents to Walker without saying a word. Walker reviewed the pages beneath the glow of a flashlight. The beam moved slowly across each line. His eyes stopped more than once, then stopped again. Naomi noticed his breathing change. Not dramatically, just enough. A man realizing that certainty and accuracy were not always the same thing. The wind rustled nearby trees. Somewhere beyond the highway, a train horn echoed through the darkness. The sound lingered for several seconds before fading away. Walker lowered the papers. Special assignments, he murmured almost to himself. He looked at Naomi. Federal clearances. Another page turned. Advanced investigative certifications. He turned one more page. Then another. Every document confirmed what Gaines already knew. What Naomi already knew. What the officers were only now beginning to understand. The younger officers exchanged glances. One shifted uncomfortably. Another looked toward Naomi with an expression that seemed closer to respect than suspicion. Walker remained silent for a long moment. Then he folded the documents carefully. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Carefully. The distinction mattered. "Why were you riding through this area tonight?" he asked. The question sounded different now. Less like an accusation. More like genuine curiosity. Naomi looked toward the highway stretching beyond the trees. "Because I enjoy riding." Walker waited. "That is all." Naomi nodded. "Sometimes a road is just a road." The answer seemed almost disappointingly simple. Yet that simplicity forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable reality. The story they had imagined never existed. No hidden crime. No elaborate explanation. No dramatic pursuit. Just a woman riding a motorcycle through the night. Gaines adjusted his coat and glanced at the tablet once more. His expression hardened slightly for the first time. Naomi noticed immediately. Something else was there. Something separate from the traffic stop. Something larger. Gaines looked toward her. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Naomi recognized the signal. The real reason he had arrived was not sitting inside those printed reports. It was inside the tablet. And whatever information had brought him to Route 17 had not disappeared simply because the misunderstanding was ending. In fact, judging by the concern now visible on his face, the most important part of the night had only just begun. The night settled into an unusual stillness. The flashing patrol lights remained, but their urgency had faded. Water dripped from the guardrail beside the highway in a slow rhythm. The spectators who had gathered earlier began returning to their vehicles one by one, their curiosity replaced by uncertainty. Whatever dramatic story they thought they were witnessing had dissolved into something quieter and far more complicated. Naomi stood beside her motorcycle and looked toward the dark tree line beyond the shoulder. The air smelled fresh after the rain. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the woods. For the first time all evening, nobody was asking questions. Nobody was making assumptions. Nobody was rushing toward conclusions. The silence felt almost fragile. Walker remained several yards away holding the printed reports. He had reviewed them twice already. Perhaps 3 times. Yet the documents seemed less important now than the thoughts moving through his mind. Earlier that evening, he had been convinced he understood the situation. He had trusted instinct over patience, confidence over evidence. Now he found himself replaying every conversation, every assumption, every moment leading to this point. The realization was uncomfortable, not because he had made a mistake. Everyone made mistakes. The discomfort came from understanding how easily the mistake had happened. Gaines quietly stepped beside Naomi. Neither spoke immediately. They simply watched the traffic flowing beneath the moonlight. Long lines of headlights drifted across the highway like streams of silver moving through darkness. "You were right," Gaines finally said. Naomi glanced toward him. "About what?" "People reveal themselves before the facts do." Naomi smiled faintly. "Sometimes." Gaines looked down at the tablet in his hand. His expression remained serious. More serious than it had been all evening. Naomi noticed it again. Whatever information he carried had nothing to do with motorcycles or traffic stops. It belonged to something larger. Something waiting beyond this roadside encounter. The older man took a slow breath. "I did not expect to find you out here tonight." "Neither did I," Naomi replied. For a moment, both of them shared a quiet laugh. The sound disappeared into the night air almost immediately. Walker slowly approached. His steps lacked the certainty they had carried earlier. Not weak. Not fearful. Thoughtful. He stopped several feet away. Moonlight reflected across the wet pavement between them. "Miss Carter," he said. Naomi turned toward him. The officer paused before continuing. It was clear he was choosing his words carefully. "I think I owe you an apology." Naomi studied him without speaking. Walker looked briefly toward the highway before returning his gaze. "Not because of your profession," he continued. "Not because of your credentials. Because I stopped listening before I had all the facts." The younger officers nearby grew quiet. Nobody interrupted. Naomi looked at him for several seconds. The wind stirred the trees behind them. "That takes honesty to admit," she said. Walker nodded slightly. "I am trying." The answer was simple. Genuine. More genuine than anything he had said all evening. Naomi respected that. Not perfection. Effort. People changed one honest moment at a time. Gaines watched the exchange silently. Then his tablet vibrated. Once. Briefly. The sound seemed unusually loud in the stillness. He looked down at the screen. The color immediately drained from his face. Naomi noticed it. Walker noticed it too. The atmosphere shifted again. Subtle. Immediate. Gaines stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen. When he looked up, the calm expression he had carried throughout the night was gone. In its place stood something else. Urgency. Real urgency. He turned toward Naomi. "We need to talk," he said quietly. The words hung in the cool night air. And for the first time since the traffic stop began, Naomi understood that the most important part of the story had not happened yet. It was only now arriving. Naomi followed Gaines a short distance away from the patrol vehicles. The sounds of the highway faded behind them. Water still clung to the leaves overhead, occasionally falling in soft drops onto the grass beside the shoulder. Gaines stopped near the guardrail and unlocked his tablet. The glow illuminated his face. What Naomi saw there immediately confirmed her suspicion. This was never about the traffic stop. "When did this come in?" she asked. Gaines exhaled slowly. 23 minutes ago." Naomi studied the screen. Several photographs appeared. Financial records. Property transfers. Internal communications. Names highlighted in yellow. Locations marked across 3 counties. The information connected pieces of an investigation that federal agencies had been quietly assembling for months. Her eyes moved across the documents with practiced precision. Then she noticed something that made her pause. One location stood out from the others. A familiar name. A familiar department. Gaines watched her reaction. "You see it?" Naomi nodded. "I do." Neither spoke for a moment. The implications settled heavily between them. Behind them, Walker remained near the patrol vehicles, unaware that the story unfolding beside the highway had become far larger than anything he imagined. Gaines lowered his voice. "We received confirmation tonight. Multiple sources. Independent verification. The evidence is solid." Naomi continued reading. The investigation centered around misconduct allegations involving several public officials, contractors, and intermediaries operating across the region. Most of the names were unfamiliar. A few were not. One detail immediately caught her attention. The local police department connected to Walker's jurisdiction appeared repeatedly throughout the files. Not Walker himself, not the younger officers standing nearby, but people higher in the chain of command. People whose decisions carried influence. People who rarely expected scrutiny. Naomi looked up. "How many know?" Gaines shook his head. "Very few." He closed the tablet halfway. "That is why I came personally." The wind moved gently across the shoulder. Traffic continued flowing beneath the moonlight. Everything looked normal. Ordinary. Yet Naomi knew that some of the most important investigations in her career had unfolded beneath perfectly ordinary skies. She glanced back toward the patrol vehicles. Walker stood talking quietly with another officer. His posture looked different now. Less rigid. More reflective. The image contrasted sharply with the names appearing inside the federal files. Gaines followed her gaze. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "The man who spent the evening making assumptions may end up helping expose people who have spent years hiding behind authority." Naomi considered the observation. It was possible. Human beings rarely fit neatly into first impressions. That lesson had shaped her entire career. Gaines reopened the tablet and showed her one final page. This time Naomi's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A meeting had been scheduled. A location. A time. Tomorrow morning. Several individuals under active review were expected to attend. The opportunity was significant. Perhaps the most significant development in months. Gaines locked the screen. "We need you on this." Naomi looked toward her motorcycle. Rainwater still glimmered across the black paint beneath the moonlight. Several hours earlier, she had started the ride, hoping to escape work for one night. Fate clearly had other plans. She laughed quietly. "I had a feeling my vacation would not last." Gaines smiled for the first time since receiving the message. "Neither did I." As they walked back toward the patrol vehicles, Naomi noticed Walker watching them. The officer could tell something important had changed. He did not know what. Not yet. But the look in his eyes had transformed completely from the certainty he carried at the beginning of the night. Now there was curiosity, humility, and perhaps something else. A willingness to learn. Naomi suspected he would need that quality very soon. When Naomi and Gaines returned to the patrol vehicles, the atmosphere had changed completely. The tension that had dominated the roadside earlier was gone. In its place stood something quieter. Reflection. The younger officers had already begun gathering equipment and preparing to clear the scene. Several patrol lights were switched off, allowing the moonlight to reclaim the highway. Walker stood waiting near the shoulder. He seemed unsure whether to speak first. Naomi saved him the trouble. "Officer Walker." He nodded. "Ms. Carter." For a moment, neither continued. The night breeze carried the scent of wet pine from the woods beyond the road. Traffic flowed normally now, as though nothing unusual had ever happened. Yet both knew they would remember this night for a very long time. Walker looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "Can I ask you something?" Naomi nodded. "Of course." He hesitated. "How do you stay calm when people assume the worst?" The question surprised some of the younger officers standing nearby. It surprised Gaines as well. Naomi could see genuine curiosity behind it. Not defensiveness. Not pride. Curiosity. She looked toward the highway for a moment before answering. "Because if I let every assumption define me, I would spend my entire life proving strangers wrong instead of living my own life." The words settled quietly into the air. Nobody interrupted. Walker absorbed them carefully. Naomi continued. "People carry experiences, fears, biases, expectations. Sometimes those things speak louder than facts. The only thing I control is how I respond." Walker nodded slowly. The answer seemed to affect him more than he expected. For the first time all evening, Naomi saw something different in him. Humility. The kind that comes only after certainty breaks apart and leaves room for growth. Gaines glanced at his watch. Dawn was still a few hours away, but the next phase of the investigation would begin soon. Time mattered now. He stepped closer. "We should get moving." Naomi nodded. Then she turned back toward Walker. The officer looked as though he wanted to apologize again, explain again, perhaps even defend himself. Naomi spared him the effort. "You made a mistake," she said calmly. "What matters is what you do after recognizing it." Walker looked genuinely relieved. Not because he had been forgiven, because someone had given him an opportunity to become better than the version of himself who started this night. The younger officers exchanged glances. They had witnessed the entire encounter from beginning to end. Lessons traveled farther than lectures. Sometimes one moment changed how people approached every situation afterward. Walker extended his hand. Naomi looked at it for a second before shaking it. The gesture was simple, professional, respectful, nothing more, nothing less. Yet it carried more meaning than any speech either of them could have given. Gaines smiled faintly. "You know," he said, looking at Walker, "most people spend years learning what you learned tonight." Walker gave a quiet laugh. "I wish there had been an easier way." "There usually is," Naomi replied. "People just rarely choose it." Another round of soft laughter followed. The tension finally disappeared completely. Above them, the clouds had almost entirely cleared. Moonlight reflected across the black motorcycle waiting beside the road. Naomi walked toward it and placed her helmet beneath one arm. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the trees. The ride she had planned was gone. The quiet evening she wanted had vanished hours ago. Yet somehow she felt lighter than before. Because sometimes the road took people exactly where they needed to go, even when it was not the destination they planned. Behind her, Walker watched silently, not as an officer observing a traffic stop, as a man reconsidering old assumptions. And as Naomi prepared for the much larger challenge waiting beyond the highway, she suspected that lesson might end up mattering just as much as the investigation itself. The engine started with a low, steady growl that blended into the quiet rhythm of the night. Naomi secured her helmet and looked once more at the stretch of highway ahead. The road shimmered beneath moonlight and fading moisture, a silver ribbon disappearing into the distance. Behind her, the patrol vehicles were preparing to leave. Doors closed. Radios crackled softly. The scene that had begun with tension and certainty now ended with reflection and silence. Gaines stepped beside his SUV and gave a brief nod. There was work waiting before sunrise. Important work. The kind that rarely appeared in headlines, but often changed lives all the same. Naomi understood. She nodded back. No lengthy discussion was necessary. Some partnerships were built through years of trust rather than words. She eased the motorcycle forward and rolled toward the highway entrance. The cool air rushed around her as the machine gathered speed. Mile after mile slipped beneath the tires. The dark landscape unfolded around her in peaceful silence. Yet her thoughts remained behind for a moment. Not on the investigation. Not on the federal files. on the roadside conversation she had just left behind. She thought about her father, about the lessons he repeated at the kitchen table, about patience, character, dignity. Those lessons had carried her farther than any badge ever could. Several hours later, the first traces of dawn appeared along the horizon. Pale orange light pushed against the darkness. The sky slowly brightened above the rolling Carolina countryside. Naomi pulled into a scenic overlook and brought the motorcycle to a stop. The world felt different at sunrise. Cleaner, quieter, full of possibility. She removed her helmet and stood beside the guardrail, overlooking miles of trees and distant farmland. Morning mist drifted across the landscape. Birds began greeting the day from hidden branches below. Her phone vibrated. A message from Gaines. The operation was moving forward. Multiple agencies were coordinating. The information gathered overnight had already begun making a difference. Naomi read the message and smiled faintly. Then she locked the screen and slipped the phone away. The sunrise deserved her attention more than the device in her hand. Hundreds of miles away from where the night had started, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. Meanwhile, back in town, Officer Walker arrived home just before dawn. He parked in his driveway, but remained inside the vehicle for several minutes. The house was quiet. The neighborhood still asleep. He sat there thinking about everything that had happened. About assumptions. About certainty. About how easily confidence could become blindness when facts were ignored. Eventually, he stepped out and walked toward his front door. Before entering, he paused and looked at the brightening sky. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning habits he had never examined before. Growth rarely arrived comfortably, yet it had arrived nonetheless. And perhaps that was the real lesson hidden within the long night. Not that one person had been proven right and another wrong. Not that authority mattered more than humility or vice versa. The lesson was simpler. Every person carried a story invisible to strangers. Every face contained experiences nobody else could see. Every assumption risked hiding the truth. Back at the overlook, Naomi placed her helmet on the seat and took one final look at the horizon. Golden sunlight spilled across the land. The wind moved gently through the trees below. She smiled, started the engine again, and continued down the open road. The motorcycle became smaller and smaller against the morning light until it finally disappeared beyond the curve of the highway. The sun climbed higher. The road remained. And in the quiet that followed, the only thing left behind was the unmistakable feeling that justice, dignity, and understanding often arrive not with noise, but with the calm certainty of a new day.